Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. My name is John Santoro. I'm the Executive Vice President for Lieberman Management. I wanted to take a moment to welcome you all here this evening. It's so great to see so many great clients and board members and staff here this evening, especially on such a raw, cold night. I think telling of things to come, but thank you so much for coming out. It's always our pleasure to host these events, have an opportunity to network and mingle a little and then have some education along the way. So we're very flattered that you took the time to spend with us this evening. I'd like to make just a few quick introductions, then go through our agenda briefly, and then we'll get right into the program. I wanted to recognize a few important staff members who are here today. Carla Kennedy, who is our CEO, standing in the back. Carla, thank you. Carla has the privilege of paying for this every time, so we're always happy to see her here. Judy Ziner, who is our Vice President of Operations. Judy, right up here in the front. Excellent. We also have several of our regional directors here tonight. Mike Porter, Sheila Dietz, Jackie Abraham, Sarah Kacharis, Margaret Schaumberger, and Jessica Tolles, who is assisting from our suburban office today as well. And also Angela Dewey and Jenny Garcia, who were instrumental in putting this program together tonight. We thank them very much for their work. Angela, by the way, is going to be filming the entire program this evening, and we're going to post it online for anyone who couldn't make it tonight. Or any of your colleagues on the board will have an opportunity to view it as well. So this is what we're going to do tonight. We have about a 9-hour program, and the bar is now closed. Okay, so we'll get you out of here. We'll do our best to stick to our schedule. But we have some very interesting and exciting topics and speakers tonight. We have David Sugar from Arnstein Lehr, better called Saul, I call it now Saul Ewing. We also have the good folks from Elliott and Associates, Mike and Laura Elliott, going to talk about some tax appeal work. The folks from AT&T, who will talk to you about latest innovations in technology for high-rise buildings, and also Kelvin Cornish from Nania Energy to talk about electric charging stations. So very interesting topics. We'll keep it moving. You will have an opportunity to ask questions right after each speaker, and we'll kind of keep the clock so that we don't have everyone here too late this evening. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, I wanted to also, it's great to see all of our wonderful clients who have been with us for a number of years. We appreciate your business and in this relationship and partnership very much. But we're also very excited when we have new clients joining us, and we are joined by a whole crew from 400 North LaSalle, Mike Downs and the gang, who are going to be starting with us shortly. We're so pleased to have you here, and several of our friends from 5 North Wabash, who we started with earlier this month. So thank you for being here as well. David Sugar, who many of you have known for years and may actually represent you now, is a partner at Saul Ewing Arnstein Lehr Chicago office. And he's the chair of the firm's condominium law group. His practice focuses on real estate and corporate matters, especially the representation of condominium associations and common interest community associations. David did his undergraduate work at the University of Illinois and received his law degree from Northwestern. And he's going to talk to you today about some legal updates, in particular the Public Act 292, which was passed recently. So without further ado, David Sugar.
Evening, everybody. It's somehow very appropriate to be talking about this new legislation just before Halloween because it's really pretty scary stuff. The topic for my talk tonight I've called the good, the bad, and the disappointing. And that is what this package of legislation is. What we are talking about is Public Act 292. Before I begin, I want to say something I was mentioning, that in the back of my mind, I wondered who voted for this thing. Because you've probably heard a little bit about it. There are some really bad things in this law. Who voted for it? I have an easy answer for you. Everyone. Every single senator and representative in Springfield voted in favor of this law. There was not one no vote. Go figure. So, this package of legislation is a little bit of a hodgepodge of different things, some of which are good, some of which are really bad, some of which are sort of in between. And we're going to pick them off one at a time and save the big discussion topic for last. Let's begin with deemed approval from mortgagees. If you've ever tried to amend your condominium declaration, you know that many associations require only that you give the holders of mortgages a notice. Although that's a little bit of an administrative burden, it's easy to do. It just costs money, takes some time, you have to find their names. But there are associations in this city whose declarations have a different requirement. And the requirement is that you get approval from the banks that hold the mortgages on the units in your building. Anybody in the room have one of those? Okay. When you need approval, as a practical matter, when you need approval from the mortgage lenders, you can't amend your declaration. Because you can send letters to Wells Fargo until the cows come home. You will not get a response from them, much less an approval. So this new law says that if your declaration says that, you no longer need to actually get their approval. You can get what's called a deemed approval. You give them a notice. If they don't complain within a period of time, they are magically deemed to have given you their approval. For those associations who have that requirement in your declarations, this is a good thing. The second thing in this legislation that I think everyone will tell you is a good thing has to do with hallway space. The classic situation is there are two units whose doors face each other at the end of a corridor. And I either own both of them or I'm going to buy both of them. And I come to the board and I say, no one needs or wants the hallway space between these two units. Let me have it. Up until a few years ago, this was not a big deal. Section 31 of the Condominium Act for many, many years has said that if you're going to legally combine those two units into one unit, you could go to the board and say, I would like the hallway space. And unless the association or some other unit owner had need of that hallway space, the board needed to give it to you. And that was lovely, and we all did that for many, many years until the Illinois Appellate Court said, Section 31 of the Act is unconstitutional. Why? Because it gives away hallway space without a vote of 100% of the unit owners. But wait a minute, Judge. The state law says you can do it. So Section 31 of the Act was invalidated by the court, and associations generally stopped doing these hallway arrangements because you know you can't get 100% unit owner approval ever. Now, at least not in any of the associations that are probably in this room, now this new legislation sort of pumps life back into Section 31 and specifically says this provision of the Act is intended specifically to override the 100% unit owner requirement, and therefore it's legal. Bottom line, we are back to where we were 5 years ago, where if people own those facing units, do a legal combination and come before the board, you can now, as a board, let them do that, give them authority to do that without any sort of unit owner. What the change in the law does not touch is a touchy issue that we're not going to talk about tonight, but I'll leave a little seed in your mind, and that is, what do you want to charge that unit owner for the use of the space? So it's a topic for another day. The third change that was made, and by the way, everything I'm describing takes effect as of January 1, 2018. None of this is in effect today. It will go into effect as of the first of the year. The third change has to do with a topic that I don't think most or maybe any of you will ever deal with, but you may find it interesting. There is a wave of deconversion transactions going on in this city where associations that have a very high percentage of rentals typically are looking at major capital expenditures, are deciding to throw in the towel, basically, and say, we're prepared to sell our whole building and all the units in it to a buyer, and let this buyer remove the condominium regime and run and own the building as an apartment building. All of that is done pursuant to Section 15 of the Condo Act, a provision that's been there for nearly 50 years and no one paid any attention to it at all until about 5 years ago. In today's economic climate, where rents are where they are, interest rates are low, there are some properties where the building is worth more as a rental building than it is as the sum of the value of the condominium units. So these transactions have been going on, and a lot of people complain to the legislature saying, I've been forced out of my home. Nobody seems to care that my mortgage is underwater. Help me, help me, help me. Well, so the folks who wrote this law decided that they wanted to help, but I'm not sure they thought it through all the way. One of the things that they've added is if you're going to get forced out of your home and you don't vote in favor of this bulk sale, you have the right, at a minimum, to have your mortgage paid off. That kind of makes sense. I can tell you that in these Section 15 bulk sale transactions, typically that has to happen one way or the other. But they also added something that's a little goofy. And they added a provision that says, and in addition, if you are a resident unit owner and you are being forced from your unit, you are entitled to relocation expenses as defined in a certain federal law. Okay, you look up the federal law and it talks about farms and businesses. And you wonder, what do I get if I'm a unit owner and I'm forced out? What constitutes relocation expenses? I can tell you I have no idea. But I can tell you that if you had a farm and the Department of Agriculture pushed you out of your farm, the most you could get was $31,000. So this is another very well considered, thoughtful provision in this piece of legislation. The next change that was made has to do with accounting. And I know that's a topic that will make most of you have your eyes glaze over. And that is, under the Condominium Act, associations have to provide an annual accounting to your unit owners. You know, that statement. Most of you, I would guess almost everyone in the room here, hires a CPA firm and has them do some degree of financial review, an audit, a review, a compilation, something, separate from what Lieberman gives you. Lieberman does the accounting and the financials every month and a year end. This is something separate, and this is given to the unit owners. So somebody seemed to think and convinced some other people in Springfield that it was really important that the financial statements that are given to owners conform to something called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. Anybody in the room know what GAAP is? Yes, sir.
Generally Accepted Accounting Principles.
And who uses it?
I do, and I think they should be done monthly.
Okay. Which sorts of organizations use GAAP?
Every business except a hot dog stand or a newspaper stand.
And GAAP was developed originally for larger companies.
No.
Okay.
I disagree, I'm sorry.
That's fine. There is nothing in the condominium law today that requires that financial statements for condominiums and homeowner associations be prepared in any particular way. I'm happy to have somebody correct me, but I believe that typically financials, and I'm no CPA, for condominiums are generally prepared on a modified accrual basis. Okay, I got a good nod, so I'll take that. You're shaking no, she's shaking yes. I can tell you that she's got a second, because when this law was passed, I spoke to one of the CPAs in town whose firm specializes in doing accounting for condo work, and he agrees with you. So the question is, what are the great benefits of GAAP in a condominium association? When your management company prepares the financial statements, they're prepared on a modified accrual basis, and if that conforms with GAAP, I know you disagree, but if it conforms with GAAP, why did we need this legislation? Yes?
Because you need to make it, you have a large piece of property. I live in a building with 250 units. Nobody knows how to read a P&L. Nobody would know on the board what a P&L looks like if it creeped up a bit of the ass, okay? So, and plus, they're on a calendar basis from August 1st to July 31st, and it's been like that for 50 years. So the budgeting cycle is off, their accounting cycle is off, their tax cycle is off, and their planning cycle is off. And basically what it does is, there's no conformity across any of these properties, all right? It's sort of like a cottage industry, shall we say.
And how does...
And I've worked for large, Fortune 50 companies. I've run P&Ls. I get a P&L every month. I get the quarterly roll-up, I get the annual roll-up. You can't do that. That's why my condo association, and I'm on the board today, is so dysfunctional, is because the first cut is the budgetary process, and they haven't been able to get it right for 50 years.
Okay, but
That's why GAAP is important.
GAAP won't fix any of those problems.
What it does is, they throw these things out cavalierly.
I hear you, and I feel your pain at your association, but I'm looking at this saying, how does doing financials in accordance with GAAP make people happier? So
Okay.
we'll give you another shot
I'll give
at
you a
it.
good example. A couple months ago, we presented the dashboard to the owners, which showed a large surplus. And I said, the surplus doesn't exist. It does exist, but not in the amount you see, because there are accruals for insurance, utilities, payroll that are not on there that are gonna hit hard. You think there's a big surplus, in 2 months, you're gonna see that surplus drop considerably. You're gonna say, what is the board doing that this surplus went away? It didn't go away. It was steady throughout under GAAP. But because of the fluctuations under modified accrual, cash basis, we see these fluctuations and people get in their head, oh, we have this large surplus, let's spend some money. It's not there.
So thank you. I am delighted to hear that there is someone in the universe who can explain, at least, because having spoken with some CPAs who work in the condo field, they all kind of scratch their heads as to where this came from. Maybe there is some benefit to it, I don't know. All I know is that if I'm you and I'm in your association, and it's important that your association do its financials in a particular way, you do your financials in a particular way. I think for most of the folks in the room, you're going to get the same financials you always got. Your CPA is going to give you the same year-end financial statement you always got, and I think the unit owners are going to get the same numbers they've always got. So this one for me, we'll come back. This one for me was a little bit of a head scratcher.
Can I have any more comment about that?
Sure.
You're speaking, you're speaking as an attorney.
I do that.
And I'll defer to you for the law, but I'm an operator. I run stuff. I use the monthly P&L and that budget and those accounting and GAAP principles as a monthly tool, all right? And that's the way we gotta look at it from
And-
operating.
And if a
perspective.
board wants the financials done in a particular way, the board can have the financials done in a particular way. So I think we probably beat that one to death. Let's move on and get to a topic that I found surprisingly disappointing. I'm going to describe a provision in a condo declaration, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands, how many of your associations have this sort of provision in your declaration? The provision reads, at the end of every year, the association will distribute a statement showing whether there has been, at the end of the year, a surplus of income over expense plus reserves or a shortfall. And those declarations typically go on to say that if there is a surplus, come on everybody, it needs to be refunded, and if there's a deficit, you need to impose a special assessment over the next 6 months. How many of you have that? Okay. This was a big, big problem, and the bar associations and others came up with a really good idea that was sent down to Springfield, and that was, let's nullify those provisions in declarations. To the extent your association is locked in to treat the deficit in a certain way or to treat the surplus in a certain way, let's nullify that and let the boards use their judgment. If you have a surplus, let me put it into the reserve fund. Don't make me give it back. If I have a deficit for $3.28, don't make me do a special assessment on 400 unit owners. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, that's what it could be. However, that's not what the boys in Springfield did. What the boys in Springfield did is they said, well, if you have a provision like this in your declaration, you follow it. You do what it says. Okay, thank you for nothing. But it's what else they did. They said if you don't have a provision in your declaration that forces you to handle a deficit or a surplus in a particular way, now you do. Now in the statute, it tells you what you must do if you have, what you need to do with that money if you have a surplus, and what you must do if you have a deficit. Thank you very much. That's what we have. So the goal was to make this problem go away for all of you who raised your hands. What the legislature did is, not only did it not help any of you who raised your hands, it created a problem for everyone else in them. So you're very welcome. Yes, sir?
Condos only.
Condos only.
Is there a time constraint? They had to put in some type of time constraint on
No,
what is year end and that it has to be addressed within 90 days?
no, no.
Well, now then can they go after you?
One of the things you're going to hear from me a lot is that this legislation was not, in my opinion, well thought out. Forget the fact that I think it's bad. Even if it was good, it's still not well thought out and not done in a particularly thoughtful way. There is a lot of ambiguity, and I have a feeling that there are going to be lawsuits, especially over the stuff we haven't gotten to yet. So. Okay, one of the other things that's in this legislation is an extension of deadlines. You know that when you do a special assessment, unit owners have 14 days to try and gather up a petition to try and override the board. And during that 14-day period, you're sitting there nervously twiddling your thumbs, counting the days, because you can't sign a contract with your contractor to get the work done until you clear that hurdle. You need to know that there has not been a petition filed within that 14 days. So we all sit around waiting anxiously to see if that petition comes or if it doesn't. Today, you cool your heels for 14 days. starting in January, you're going to cool your heels for 21 days. Anybody know why that might have been extended? Because there are people, there are homeowners in this state who feel oppressed by all of you. By all of you, and me too, I should add. And feel that they are oppressed and that the boards are making unilateral decisions without proper consultation with people who are much smarter than all of us. And therefore, this legislation caters to those people who wish to limit and restrict the board's authority to run the building. So you will see, and there are a whole series of deadlines, time limits for unit owners to take action. I'll give you another example. If I were a board president and I wanted to hire my own company, I wanted the board to hire my company to supply light bulbs to the building, there is a procedure in the law where you give notice to everybody in the building, and if no one objects or asks for a vote, it's okay. But there's a deadline. That deadline has been extended. There's deadlines for objecting to certain improvements. Those deadlines have been extended. Every deadline has been extended. That to me is problematic. I think the old system with the deadlines that was set worked just fine, but this legislation represents a big push by unit owners who feel aggrieved and feel that somehow they should be running your association even though you folks are the ones who are elected to the board. Now we come to the bonus stuff. The first one has to do with the right to inspect and copy association records. Let's start by walking through what the law says today. The law says today that if I am a unit owner in one of your associations and I want to see financial records, or I want to see copies of contracts, I want to see the cable of contract, because I want to have the building go somewhere else. What I need to do as a unit owner is I need to make a written request and I need to specify a proper purpose. What does that mean? What is a proper purpose? Well, what it means is my objective, I need to show that my objective is something that is in the best interests of the association, and I want that information to use for the best interests of the association. Okay, so I submit my request, I state my proper purpose. What happens next? Today, the board has 30 days to think about it and decide how it wants to respond. Of course, if you remember, the courts have kind of handcuffed us and said, you can't make any decisions without having a board meeting. So that 30 days gives you enough time to think about it, call a board meeting, and have a board meeting to make a decision. Okay, you have a board meeting, and you realize that what I really want to do is I work for RCN. Sorry. I work for RCN, and what I want to do is I want to see the contract because I want to submit a competing bid. Can the board tell me under today's law, no? Yes, the board can say, we don't think your purpose is proper. We think that you want to see that contract and make a copy of it, not for the association's best interest, but only for your best interest. So the board says, no, we're not going to let you have it. Okay, I now go to my lawyer, who says, all right, we'll sue him, because that's the answer to everything. So I hire a lawyer, lawyer sues the board, the judge listens to all of this, and the judge ultimately says, yeah, I don't know, maybe he's got a good motive, maybe he doesn't have a good motive, but I'm going to let him see the contract. Okay, board isn't happy with that outcome, but do I, the plaintiff, get the board to pay my legal fees? Under current law, The law says no. In order for me as the plaintiff, the guy who asked for all this stuff, to make the board pay my legal fees, I need to convince the judge that the board acted in bad faith. That's the law today. Ready? Now, the requirement to get records, and by that I'm referring to financial records, I'm referring to copies of contracts. All I gotta do is make a written request. The requirement for proper purpose, which has been in Illinois law, not just condominium law, but corporate law, for well over 120 years, has been ripped out of the condominium law. In addition, when I walk in and I say I'd like to see the financial records, I'd like to see the contracts, you don't get 30 days anymore, you get 10 now to decide. And if you don't give me the records, I have a right to file a lawsuit and I will get my attorney's fees back. Not a very good solution. This, again, is coming from the constituency here in this state of unit owners who feel that the board is playing hide the ball, that boards are somehow evil, and of course all of you are taking kickbacks, we all knew that. And all sorts of terrible and underhanded things are happening, and the only way unit owners can protect themselves against all of you evil people is to be able to get records on demand. That is a critical feature of these new changes to the law. It is a very problematic feature to the changes to this new law. Yes?
So aren't there any confidentiality protections? Like in the example you gave, where if I work for RCN and I want to get that contract so I can do a competing bid, isn't there any protection that protects the association from someone to go look at this contract or this pricing and go tell
All
them?
together now, what's the answer, folks?
Oh, really?
Yes,
Wow.
there is no protection. But
So I can go call her and ask her what all our contracts say so that I can make sure I'm getting a good deal?
I'm not going to answer that question. If it were today, the answer would be you would not be able to see those.
But January 2nd, I can go do that.
I'm not touching them. But as they say on the late night TV commercials, but wait, there's more. It gets better. The highlight, the cornerstone of this new legislation has to do with the ability of unit owners to communicate with each other. Today, again, I want to contrast the laws that exist today and the laws that will be in January. Today, every condo association is obligated to maintain something called an official unit owner list. If you picture it as a spreadsheet on a page, off on one column is a unit number, percentage ownership interest, the name of the owner, and then an address. We'll tell you in a minute what that means, an address. But those are the 4 requirements in the law today. Now we come back to me. I'm the pesky guy who's in your wheelhouse all the time. I walk in and I hand a note to your manager or to the board president, and I say, I want that list. Okay? I have to state a proper purpose. So now I'm going to state a proper purpose. I want the list so I can communicate with my fellow unit owners. You should know that that purpose, I want to communicate with my fellow unit owners, is one that the courts have said is proper. So, okay, now I get that list. Unless, again, the board votes and says no, and we go to court, and then again, the plaintiff gets legal fees only if he can prove that the board acted in bad faith. Okay? Come January 2nd, this is going to change. Starting in January, the law will require that one of the records that every association has to maintain is that same unit owner list. But I want to read to you what it'll say. I am quoting now. A list of the names, addresses, email addresses. Listen closely, addresses and email addresses, telephone numbers, and weighted vote of all members. So remember the spreadsheet, unit number, percentage ownership, unit owner name and address? You're now going to have to add, the state law says, 2 more columns with everyone's email address and everyone's phone number. Now, what all of you should be saying is, where did this concept come that I give up my privacy and my unlisted phone number solely because I have the misfortune to be the owner of a condominium unit? Where is this concept from? The concept is coming from the same people we were talking about. They are people who say, I don't want to spend 49 cents of postage to be able to send a letter to my fellow unit owners. I want to be able to do it for free. I want to be able to do it for free 20 times a day if I want to. And I want the phone numbers so that if they are cell phones, I can send them text messages. And so, come on, we can get the chorus back here. We can also do robocalling when it comes campaign time. And there are people in this room who can tell you that I'm not making that up. That's real. So, we have this horrible conflict between individual owners' privacy rights and the desire of some unit owners to communicate with their fellow unit owners more easily and less expensively than it is today. Not pretty, in my opinion. I think it's very, very problematic. I believe that probably on January the 2nd, many of your associations will receive a request for this kind of a unit owner list. And I believe that on January the 13th, many of your associations will get sued. Because, oh, by the way, you're only going to have 10 days to provide it. So, folks, what do you think about that? I'm eager to hear from all of you. This is a good group. Let me take somebody all the way to the end. Yes, sir?
I have a question. I believe the statute does not provide for a penalty and the unit owner fails to provide either his phone number or his email. And if that's correct, how can the board enforce it?
Okay, the comment was the statute does not provide for any penalty on a unit owner who doesn't provide their email address or their phone number. How does this get enforced? The law doesn't say that you need to provide your email address and phone number. The board, the statute says that the board has to maintain that list with that information. Let me add one more thing, and then we'll take some more questions about this. There is an age-old problem. I actually got an email today from a property manager who said to me that they have a unit owner who is gathering signatures for a state representative's election bid, and they have asked for a copy of the unit owner list, the same list we've been talking about. Under today's law, we told that unit owner, no, you can't have it. The reason you want it is not a proper purpose. Well, in January, there's no longer a proper purpose requirement, but there is another little twist that the thoughtful authors of this legislation came up with. And they said that if you're worried that the person who's going to get this list of emails and phone numbers will use it improperly, the board can require that that unit owner certify in writing that the information will not be used for commercial purposes. And commercial purposes means use of those names and phone numbers in any form for sale, resale, or solicitation or advertisement for sales or services. Under the laws, it will be in January that unit owner gets the list because he doesn't want it for commercial purposes. And if I want the list to give to the Democratic Party for fundraising, I can do that. If I want the list to give to my alma mater for fundraising, I can do that. And to be honest with you, if I want the list so I can send out an ad for my auto body shop, I can do that, and the worst that can happen to me under this law is the board can fine me. Well, maybe it's worth it to get my ad out to the 600 people who live in your building. Yes, well, first, all the way in the back.
I just want to know, what if I specifically tell the management company, don't give out my email address, don't give out my phone number?
So the comment in question is, what if I, as a unit owner, specifically tell the management company, don't you dare give out my email address or phone number?
Doesn't matter.
Well, that's an excellent question, the answer to which the first lawsuit over this law will probably try and answer. I know for a certainty that there are board members, maybe some of you, who are going to say, hell no, you're not getting my phone number. So that people, anybody who wants to in the building can get their hands on that list and contact me. I don't want my email box jammed with 20 emails at election season in the building. How that will happen, how that will work its way through, kind of remains to be seen. Yes, ma'am.
Can we have a primary and secondary email, and we only have to give the primary email?
Well, again, because of the very careful way that this law was drafted, it says that it wants email addresses. I don't know if that means one address per unit owner. I don't know what it means. But if there is an email address on the unit owner list, I guess the association has complied.
And is the association allowed to send out an email saying this person has requested your information? And
No. The question was, if I come to my association and ask for the list, can the association let everybody else in the building know that I've made the request? I suppose you could, but it doesn't make any difference, because the law says I've got to provide it.
But we could provide their phone number that they could block, perhaps? No?
I don't know. Keep in mind, the purpose of this law is to make it easier for unit owners to communicate with other unit owners. I would not advise, and I need to make a disclaimer, many of you have lawyers who don't look like me, and you should consult. Every association needs to talk to your own attorney as to how to handle this. But I would not advise a board to give owners instructions on how to subvert this law. That I don't think is a real good idea. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask, so kind of to that gentleman's question, as a unit owner, can I opt out of having my personal information displayed on the unit owner list specifically?
It's a wonderful question, the answer to which is unknown. Also unknown under this law is whether the board has an obligation to mine data. Let's be honest, every management office has everybody's phone number and probably has almost everybody's email. Does that mean that the board and management need to take the data that's in here, like in eStar, just hypothetically? Do you need to pull that data out and put it in this basket? Don't know. The law does not address that. Yes?
What purpose is the percentage of ownership, and what does that have to do about you're trying to communicate with someone?
I think the question was, why does the law require that this list have every unit's percentage ownership? It's for use in election campaigning, so you know which units have a heavier weighted vote. There's a question here? Yes?
What happens if a unit owner is verbally harassed, physically harassed, sexually harassed, because, now the phone numbers, email addresses are transparent? Is anybody in the association liable? Who's liable of creating that situation?
So the question was, what happens if there is a unit owner who is being stalked or harassed or intimidated by other people in the building as a result of this, which not unforeseeable. The thoughtful authors of this legislation did not really contemplate that concern. Okay, yes?
Not to belabor it, you said the statute puts the onus on the association to get the information.
No, it says the association has to have this information.
Okay.
Doesn't say how.
If the association requested it and the owner refuses to provide it, and they can't penalize the owner, isn't it effectively a defense, if you will? If somebody says to the association, you gave me an incomplete list, it doesn't have this person's number, they say I asked for it, they didn't provide it, what else do you want me to do?
I personally believe that that may be the best approach to deal with this for associations, to go to their unit owners and say, here's a form, put down on the form your email address, your phone number, at which you want to be contacted by your fellow owners. And although I don't know that it's a defense, it is a factual defense if you get sued for non-compliance. Last question, yes.
I was thinking that a good way for Doberstein is to put a rule that if you use the list for a commercial or fundraising purpose, you get a big fine.
Excuse me, that is in the law, but so what? The cat is out of the bag. And these lists, those of you who've had political buildings, once an email list is out, it gets copied and used by everybody, right?
Right?
Okay.
This law does not apply to co-op.
No. Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
All of our cooperative friends here should be breathing a sigh of relief. Thank you very much. So by the way, so David and all of our speakers will try to hang around after the meeting as long as possible, so you have an opportunity to ask more questions. I know we could talk about this particular topic all night. But another timely event is the 2018 triennial reassessment for your property taxes. It's always a stressful time for condominium associations and homeowners. We've taken the liberty of inviting Michael Elliott from Elliott and Associates this evening to talk to you briefly about that process and how you can best position your association for an appeal. Mike Elliott, who's also here this evening with Lauren Elliott, have been in the law practice since 1984, went to school at Loyola for a law degree, and has been representing condominium associations, hotels, and commercial properties on tax matters for many, many years now. And I think you'll find the presentation to be very informative and timely, and hopefully we can assist in your tax appeal endeavors coming up. Mike?
Thank you, John, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'd like to talk to you about what you need to do to gear up for the reassessment of Chicago, and I figure somehow I'm going to fit in generally accepted accounting principles because it seems to really liven up the debate.
Who knew?
Who knew, right? Could I just ask for a quick show of hands, how many of you have buildings in Chicago here? Okay, and how many don't? Okay, good. It's a Chicago audience. All right. This is a map of Cook County, and you can see it's color-coded, and it shows 3 different areas. You've heard the word triennial assessment, and the reason we have a triennial assessment is because the county's too big to assess it all at one time. It's that simple. And so they've broken it up so the city of Chicago is one area, the north suburbs is another, and the south suburbs is a third. In 2017, we're working on the reassessment of the south suburbs. 2018, it's the turn of Chicago. And if you look in that pink area, which is Chicago, you see it's broken up into a number of townships. There's 8 of them. And all over the country, we have townships. And the reason we deal with it from assessment purposes is because Chicago's too big to reassess the whole thing at one time. So we spread it out over the course of a number of months, and not all of you will get reassessed, and you won't all receive your assessment notices at the same time. As far as timing is concerned, I think it's important you kind of know when it's coming, you can prepare for it. As a good idea, you'll need to engage an attorney early enough. You'll need to, it's a great idea to communicate with your homeowner so they know what's happening. The worst thing you'd want to have happen is the first time they know that an appeal has been filed is if you decide to bill them for the attorney services, is that they get a notice and they get a bill. That doesn't go over real well. So if you can notify them maybe a couple of weeks before the assessment notices go out, that would really be a good thing. If there's one thing that makes the process go smoothly, it's getting started, getting prepared, and informing people early in the process. And you can see here, the process started, these are the dates from 3 years ago when Chicago was last reassessed. And while they're not going to be exactly the same, and we don't know today what they're going to be, they'll probably hold pretty true to this schedule, okay? So this is in the materials. We brought materials and I was told that we don't have enough. So if you don't have this and you like it, if you just want to give me your business card, I can send it to you. But if you hold on to this, this will give you a real good idea of when this is going to be coming out. They start with the smaller townships first, and as they go through the process, they get to the bigger ones. Kind of doesn't make sense, because when you're getting at the end, it gets really busy. But they take the bigger ones at the end, and that's the way we do things in Illinois. You'll see, for instance, Rogers Park came out in late February. By the time that went through their 2 levels of appeal, one before the assessor and one before the Board of Review, it took nearly a year to complete that process because they were at the beginning. But if you jump to the end of the list and you look at South Township, their notices went out in October and they were done 6 months later in April. So the process compresses as you get to the end because they got to get it done by a certain time, and there's only so much time left. The one thing, believe it or not, that may change the timing on this, and you'll never believe this, but it's the soda tax. Honestly, it's the truth. They passed the soda tax to make us all healthier, but they really wanted the money, and then repealed it, and now they don't have the money that their budget calls for, so there's going to be across-the-board cuts. We're told 10%, and we're told that the assessor and Board of Review are going to take a 10% cut, and they're cautioning us that they're going to have less people to get the job done. So it's going to be a real busy assessment year, and they're going to have less staff to do it, to get the job done. So really, it's up to your lawyers to get organized and give good documentation clearly, because there's going to be less people around to talk to about it, and that's an unfortunate problem. In terms of what is it going to look like, what is this assessment, what are these assessment increases going to look like? I think that's everybody's biggest question of me. First of all, you heard the old expression in real estate, location, 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 and I think that's really going to tell the story. The primest properties and the best locations have been appreciating the most, and since the assessments are supposed to follow the values, I think those people are going to see typically the biggest assessment increases, and that's what happened the last time Chicago was reassessed 3 years ago. You got around the park, you got in Gold Coast, you got into the River North neighborhoods, the increases were really big. When you got into southwest side of the city, property values more modest, market nowhere near as hot, the assessment increases were way smaller. The other thing I think that happens is I think there's a little regressiveness here going on. And I think that when the assessor comes out with his numbers, you know, there's no one number, there's probably a range of numbers. And it seems to me that the higher valued properties tend to get assessed at the higher end of the range, and the lower value properties tend to get it at the little bit lower end of the range. I know there was a Tribune article this summer that kind of said otherwise, but for me, I kind of see it that way. We saw in the Chicago reassessment 3 years ago, the real prime properties increases 30, 40, 50%. But you got to remember, we were on top of, 6 years of recession, where those values deflated big time. So when they bounced back, they came back in those areas pretty well. But of course, it didn't happen that way everywhere. In terms of specific increases and what you can expect after appeals are filed, I think the prime properties, you could be looking at 25%, 30, 40, depending. At least is what the proposed assessments are going to be. Middle of the road properties, you might be in the 15 to 25% range, and less prime properties, less than that. One thing I think you need to understand, at least part of your expectations, when the economy tanked, we were actually able to get the assessments lowered, to get the increases completely eliminated very often, and actually get things lowered before the starting point. And that was totally unusual. I've been doing this for 25 years, and in the years before that, that never happened. Property values went up, assessments went up, and what we were doing is trying to make the increases as small as we could make them, right? And then when everything crashed, the assessing officials just couldn't believe that the values had come down, and that's what all the appeals were about. But we're back to the old normal. And I think what your lawyers are going to be doing for you now is trying to get the assessment increases minimized. So, if you end up getting a 40% increase, when all is said and done, you might end up at a 15 or 20 or 25% increase. Don't shoot your lawyer. What's really important is, at the end of the day, are the assessments relative to the value of the property where they ought to be? We're supposed to be assessed at 10% of what we're worth for condos. So if at the end of the day you've analyzed the sales and you're at 8%, 8.5%, 9%, whatever it may be, and you got a 25% increase, that's probably a good result. Okay. A lot of times many times clients are looking at, well, this is where I am this year, this is where I was last year. That's not really the question. The question is, are they at the assessment level they're supposed to be, which is 10% or less? And I think that's what you're going to see going forward. As far as tax rates, and this is a really big story if you've been reading the newspapers. It's gotten bad and it's going to get worse even. When you get your tax bill, the big number that drives the bill is your assessment. That's what, when we file these appeals, that's what we're trying to reduce, trying to get that number as small as possible. But the other big number that's going to affect you is the tax rate. Chicago, for many years, had the lowest tax rate in all of Cook County. That was a great thing. And we also, like everywhere else in the state, we've got this problem where we have underfunded pensions. So the powers that be said, well, we've got the lowest tax rate in the whole county. We've got to do something about these pensions. Chicago taxpayers can pay more. I think it's just that simple. So they went and the city of Chicago didn't need any legislative authority to do anything about it. They're a home rule unit of government. They can pass whatever taxes they want. They're only accountable to the voters who at some point, like on the soda tax, throw tea in the harbor. So but Chicago in 2015 said, okay, let's adopt an additional levy to shore up the police, fire, and municipal employee pensions. And it wasn't too big. They also did it in 16 and 17, and they're going to do it again in 18. But then the Chicago Public Schools said, well, we've got a big problem, we want to take care of that too. But unfortunately, the Chicago Public Schools they're subject to something we call tax caps. I don't know if you've ever heard of these, but something that was passed in the 90s was actually a good thing. And it limits how much money they can take from year to year. But the schools wanted in on this, and so they had the political clout, and even though we didn't have a budget for a number of years, if you remember, when we got a stopgap budget a couple years ago, somebody slipped in the stopgap budget authority for the Chicago Public Schools to adopt supplemental levies for shoring up their pensions. And these are beyond the caps, and they can do it year after year, and let me just tell you what it's amounted to. And so when you see your tax bills in Chicago going up so much, this is a huge part of it. In 2016, they levied 2015, they levied $363 million more supplemental just for this. That was 6% more than what they levied the year before, just for this one item. The next year, it doubled, $744 million, 14% more. 2017, it's going to go to $1.2 billion, 21% more than what they had leveled 3 years earlier. That's under GAAP. So, that's the problem. Now, what normally happens when we get a reassessment and the property values are rising, it does bring the rate down, which is a good thing, right? But you've got this little thing in there bringing the rate up. And, unfortunately, it's an inflationary situation that there's nothing we lawyers can do about. It's up, I guess, to the voters and the politicians. Good luck with that. In the suburbs, by the way, I know nobody really is here. The problem isn't so bad because no given suburban school district has the political clout that the Chicago Public Schools have to get this slipped into their budgets. So they, at least, unless they all band together and share phone numbers and email addresses and stuff, they're not going to be able, to have the political clout to get this through the way Chicago did. It's amazing. They didn't have a budget for years, and they got this through in, the 11th hour of that, which is really pretty terrible. As far as appeal expectations, for a number of years, we would file every third year, and we never filed appeals in the in-between 2 years. And there was a good reason for that. Property values were going up. If we would go in the first year, get the assessment lowered, and then want to come in the second year, the facts were working against us because things were selling for more, right? And likewise in the third year. Then when the economy tanked, we looked at ourselves and said, wait a minute, we can do this every year. The facts are working on our favor, and so we started to do that. And then our clients started calling us and saying, what are you doing? Are you just churning for legal work? And we said, no. If we could get your bill reduced 10%, wouldn't you want it? We're working on a contingent fee basis. Doesn't this make sense? Sure. So we started doing that every year, and it really kind of became the norm because for 5, 6, 7 years, there was this wonderful opportunity. Now things have turned the other way. Property values are going up, and our clients are calling and saying, why aren't you contesting every year? No. Well, occasionally we can, but the amount of opportunities for that to happen are getting smaller. So I think if your expectation is that your lawyer is going to be in there fighting it every year, and the values in your building are going up, that's an unrealistic expectation. We look at it every year. If we think the opportunity is there, we'll take it, but generally it's not happening so much. As to the timing and to where you get reductions, if you've been around long enough, you see it all over the board. There's 2 levels of appeal. For many years, we got 0 out of the assessor. We got it all out of the Board of Review. And then it kind of evened up, and now it's kind of back to the point where the assessor is pretty stingy. I think it kind of makes sense. They're his numbers. He believes them, right? And we tend to get most of the relief at the Board of Review. So if you're hearing from your lawyer and they're saying the first level appeal didn't work out so well, we need to take the second level, that didn't mean that they messed up. It's just sometimes how it is. And it changes from assessment cycle to assessment cycle and assessor to assessor. When should you hire a lawyer? Well, if you go back to that second slide I gave you as to when your township opens up, that'll kind of tell you. But to me, the simple answer is if you do it in the 4th quarter, you're not going to have any time pressure. But if you're one of these townships that comes out, in September or August, you can wait. But, to be safe, 4th quarter, you can go later than that if you like. And lastly, the legislature, while they were passing wonderful condo bills and messing up other things, they also did throw a few little sweet nuggets at you. They've raised your exemptions. They're up, your homeowner's exemptions are up from $7,000 to $10,000. That saves you a few $100s in Chicago. Likewise, your senior citizen exemptions are up. and the senior citizen assessment freeze income limits are also up. So more people are now going to qualify for that. So that's what I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got. Yes, sir.
I'm a little confused. Not that's not common. But each individual condo is individually owned. Wouldn't the individual owners appeal their own taxes?
Oh, okay.
Or does the association appeal for all of the condo owners?
Gotcha. The question is, can owners appeal on their own, or does the whole building file? So the answer is, if you own a unit, you can file on your own. But the Condominium Property Act gives condo associations the right to file a collective appeal on behalf of everybody if they get a 2/3 vote of the board or a majority vote of the owners. And co-ops, because you're a corporation, the co-op board files the appeal on behalf of the building. And then the only kind of rub comes in is that sometimes you'll have an attorney files an appeal on behalf of the building, and a unit owner files an appeal on their own, and generally the owner's appeal goes forward and it comes off of the collective appeal. Yes, sir.
So as I understand it, assessed values for condos are on the entire building first, and then you use percentage of common elements to allocate it to the units, is that correct?
Okay, so the question is, how do they assess condominium buildings? And you're basically correct. What they do is they look at the sales within the building, and they look at the common area percentages on each one of those sales, and the assessor comes up with the value for the whole building, and then spreads it out according to the common area percentages.
So I have a follow-up question. It's a little hypothetical, but say you have a 50-story building. The developer allocated percentage of common elements based on square footage, not value. The unit at the top of the building is worth 50% more than the same unit at the bottom of the building. If I own the unit at the bottom of the building, why would I want the condo association to represent the whole building rather than going on my own?
Got it.
And try to get my
Okay, I'm going to answer your question a couple different ways because really there's a couple things that people might want to know about that. So the first point that was made is that sometimes the developers came up with the condominium common area percentages according to square footage. Really, they're supposed to do it according to relative value of the units. You know, that assumes they've got a crystal ball, right? And very often when it's done according to square footages, the percentages are off. So if they're off, it means somebody's high, and it means somebody's low. So a couple of questions then that come off of that one. Well, what do you do when you have those situations? So if you're a unit owner who's way too high, should you file on your own or leave it to the association? So what we've done, we've got a few buildings like that. And when we see that happening, we pull those units out and put them in a separate appeal so that they get special treatment. So I have a building by the lakefront, penthouse units, the developer's values were just way higher than he was ever able to achieve. So we put them in a separate appeal. And those people get special treatment because we know that. So if you know that, you could treat it that way. You've got to communicate with your lawyer. If you're a unit owner and you choose not to take that up, you can file your own appeal. Or if you can notify your board and ask them, to give you some special treatment. That's what we do. And we've also got situations where the percentages, for instance, we've had one building, I need to tell you about this one, but it's one of yours, and it's good news. No, it's good news. There's a very large refund.
Lieberman's responsible for that.
Yeah, it was all Lieberman. It was John's idea. But their parking spaces were way off. And their units, the parking spaces were too high, the units were too low. It was kind of messed up because the most prime units with the best views were too low, and the reverse was true. So we ended up getting it reduced at the assessor and board, and we went to a trial on the parking spaces because we said, look, these parking spaces are off. And we won that, and we were able to get that resolved. The bottom line of it is you really just have to be aware of these situations, and if you, as a association, a board member, you know that, you've got to communicate with your lawyer. And you got to come up with a game plan, well, what are we going to do about it? So you may do separate appeals, you may do what we did here, but somebody needs to know about it so they can take some action.
Do you do the same thing with respect to disproportionate personal property improvements? If one unit put in 1,000 a foot of, improvements and it's all personal property, the value of their unit could be double what's on it.
Right. So the question is, do you take into account units that have got, really decked out to the nines? And yeah, you try to. There's only so far at the first two levels of appeal that they'll get into that with you. But when we're looking at, some of these really high-end condominium buildings where appliance packages are $30,000 and $40,000, yeah, we're aware of that and we're making that argument. Yes?
One last question.
Do you think any of the candidates that are running for governor have a chance to help change this tax appeal process or just the assessment process? Because I know there's been a lot of discussion that basically the Cook County assessor has a black box, but no one really knows how they're really assessing. So, there's a couple of candidates who are saying like they really want to change the process, but I want to know, as a voter, like, are they just be asking? Are they really doing that?
So the question is this a shell game that anybody can fix? How's that? Unfortunately, when people want to take on the system, they want to take on the sexy issues that get them mileage when they start arguing, and very often they fight about absolutely the wrong thing. To me, the fundamental problem is a spending problem. There's a set of rules as to how these governmental agencies spend their money. So when you've got them locked into pension deals that don't make sense in today's world, that's what you've got to solve, because kicking this assessor out and replacing him with a different assessor, getting rid of his black box and replacing it with somebody else's black box, that's only going to change the assessment on the notice you receive. And it might make some theoretically minor difference in what your assessment ends up at the end of the day, but the tax rate's not going to change, because the big problem is when they're spending this much, then you all have to pick that up. So when you've got big pension obligations, you've got spending that is just out of control, and they're not doing anything about it, that's, to me, the fundamental problem. So unless somebody can figure out the political will to make that happen, the other stuff is just window dressing, if you ask me. And I'm running for governor. So. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And then again, Michael will be hanging out afterwards if you have further questions. We're trying to respect everyone's time and keep our program moving this evening. Our next presenter is Patrick Doberstein. He is the area manager for AT&T Connected Communities in Illinois and Wisconsin territories, and has been in this business for about 20 years, and is going to talk to you generally about initiatives and innovations in communication for properties now, internet, excuse me, internet and cable. Patrick.
Wow, the internet guy gets to go after two attorneys. I don't know how I drew that one, but we'll give it a shot. The Connected Communities group that I represent is a specialized division of AT&T that helps with single-family developers, multifamily property managers, condo boards, condo associations, and owners to help attract, retain, improve in overall performance in an end-to-end entertainment and communication solution. We at AT&T are working to simplify planning and placement of an extensive 100% fiber optic network and technology directly to every unit from project's completion all the way from conception to completion. So let's talk a little bit about how our properties wired today. So if people have been in condos for a while, they've seen a lot of different ways to do it. So most properties are going to be wired with a coaxial cable solution, and usually you're talking about a direct home run wiring from the net pop in the basement up to and into the units. If you've been around for a little while in the business, you've seen some coaxial cable wiring setups that were what were called loop through. Not common anymore, but you still run into it occasionally out there. Depending on the age of the building, the category wiring that is inside it is either a category 3, which is a little bit older technology. We see some buildings still with quad wiring, which kind of runs jack to jack to jack. And then in buildings that have considered it, we see category 5 or category 6 unshielded twisted pair. So it's Ethernet wiring and telephone wiring. And the latest and greatest, as far as AT&T is concerned, is fiber optic technology. So has anybody been in a building that's actually seen a rewire go through, whether it's coax or any other service over time, right? So it used to be the biggest single problem was that coax is kind of big and it's kind of bulky and it's kind of all over the place. And the newest technology from a fiber perspective kind of looks like this. I don't know if you guys can see that really good from the back, but when you start to talk about rewiring locations with faster, greater, better, you're all of a sudden start to talk about technology like this instead of technology like either coax or category 6. So the advantages of the increases in technology, it used to be 10 years ago when a customer walked in or when a potential buyer walked into a unit, the first thing they did was hold up their cell phone to see how many bars they got. And then they would ask how many cable TV channels were included with a base package. They don't do that anymore. Usually, the first question that anybody asks when they come walking in is, hey, what's the fastest internet speed I can get in here? And then usually there's not much follow-up question behind that, depending on what the overall answer is. So it becomes more and more important for higher and higher speed internet access because we're seeing buildings and customers and consumers, especially the younger you skew demographically, change in how they consume all of these entertainment services. So today, if you have a bulk television contract out there today, and I talked to David about it earlier, he said, you're seeing customers move into properties and being notified that it's part of their assessment and that they're paying it, and then you're getting questions like, well, why do I have to pay it? I don't use it. Or why is it included? And where are the rights associated with it, etc. What we're starting to see from more and more applications over time is that we're seeing more and more buildings start to lean toward choice. They kind of want to change maybe and get out of the bulk television business. They kind of want to look at it and say, hey, maybe we're going to leave it up to ownership. Maybe we'll let an individual resident make that decision. On the other hand, we're still seeing some buildings that say that they're perfectly happy on the bulk environment and how bulk works, and they're perfectly good in doing so. It's really an individual building's decision, and it's not something that can be really driven at a management company's space or at an entertainment provider's space. It's a little bit of something that needs to be, kind of be evaluated at an individual building basis. The most important piece is when they do surveys and they talk to customers and residents. High-speed internet access is the #1 amenity desired by MDU residents. It's tied actually with one thing. It's tied with parking. So parking and high-speed internet access are right there together. So fiber broadband and the ability to have high-speed internet access actually raises MDU rental values by about 8%, according to studies, and it actually raises realistic sold values by a little over 2%. So having higher speed internet access available makes properties more desirable, and over the long haul brings in a different client base, as well as potentially a new group of buyers. So AT&T is looking to potentially consider fiber optic services to all properties and to all units. So when we say that AT&T would bring in fiber, we would bring it actually all the way through the building and into every individual unit. We wouldn't bring it to the basement and then use a distribution method that is already existing in there. By doing that, we're eliminating kind of the middle piece of the run. So today, the coaxial cable services or any of the Ethernet services that go from the net pop to the unit is actually property of the association. So does anybody have it in their budget, like a line item to rewire their building with new cable as it goes? Because it's a pretty expensive proposition. I've yet to see a budget that actually includes that as part of it. And what you need to do, what you need to consider in this whole thing, is you need to look at the contracts that are coming up. You need to evaluate. And you need to evaluate early. Because the earlier that you can potentially evaluate this, the more options you're going to give your building and your property to be able to look at and evaluate what potential solutions are out there. So we've seen buildings that show up and go, hey, we're going to be out of contract in 120 days. Tell us what you got. And our answer at that point is, good luck with that. I wish you well. But if you look at it from a longer term perspective and you start to really take a look at those contracts and you think it through, it's going to give you much better options and alternatives down the road as far as what technologies would be available, what changes a board would want to make, and then potentially how it's going to impact both the assessment, right? Because if you do away with both, you're going to probably reduce your overall assessment. Or if you look at it and you kind of evaluate it from there, you can make better decisions long term as to what you want to do contractually. So the Condo Act of Illinois, we talked a little bit about this with David earlier, says that the association has the right to enter into bulk agreements. It doesn't say they have to enter into bulk agreements. So that again is going to get down to a board vote. And I've seen lots of different people and lots of different solutions on this over time. So what AT&T is talking about is the fiber optic network that we're talking about enhances the overall online experience for homeowners with ultra-fast speeds up to gigabit speeds per second. So that's 1,000 megabits per second versus where today the average speed for users is generally somewhere in the 20 to 50 meg range, depending on who your provider is. And it provides enough bandwidth to support all connected devices. As we continue to go, if people are streaming services today and streaming video today, the average high definition video stream takes around 6 megabytes per second to stream it. So if you start to stream multiple streams into a home, all of a sudden you need in that 18 to 24 to 30 meg bandwidth. 4K is just around the corner for wider acceptance. 4K streaming takes on average around 30 megabits per second to stream a single 4K stream. So all of a sudden when you start to talk multiple 4K streams, instead of needing that 24 to 30, now you need 90 to 100 to be able to make it work. So communities that we're partnering with on the fiber solution side of the world have the opportunities to be leaders and stay competitive by bringing the network all the way to the property and to the unit with premium content and the infrastructure needed to deliver it. You can attract new residents, you can increase overall property values, you can retain your resident base, and then you can increase the property's performance and reliability, kind of over time. So it really does give you the opportunity for buildings that are built a little bit older to technologically keep up with the buildings that were built this year or last year or the year before. And it's a pretty important concept because when people start to look at the technology packages within buildings, the brand new buildings and the new high rises are running fiber in them from the start. And they have these services available in there from the start. What you do by retrofitting fiber or some other high-speed internet access in there is you kind of keep up with that as an alternative. So when you start to talk about 1,000 megabit speeds, I kind of say the same thing that a lot of folks are probably thinking is who on earth could possibly use that much? When I started in this business 10 years ago on the multifamily side of the world, we were talking to multifamily dwelling units about 3 and 6 meg service. And it was common to talk to them about 3 and 6 meg service, and we were coming up with the concept of 45 to 50 as the high end of the market. And at the time, they looked at us and said the same thing. Oh my gosh, who could ever use 50? Now, 50 is kind of a standard in the marketplace, and people are looking around and asking, oh my gosh, who could use more than that? And the answer is, there's probably people in your building that could. So as more and more people work at home, as more and more people are looking for faster and better performance, bandwidth becomes a premium at that point. And it really does become a solution and a problem that maybe the boards and the associations need to look at. So it's kind of exciting. AT&T is willing to come out and do fiber analysis for any of the buildings that you guys have present here. Jim, who works for me, and I will be around if you want to talk about a specific building. We love the opportunity to do it, and as part of the process, we build a design. And we bring a design back to the board, and when we bring a design back to the board, there's usually 3 solutions. The first one is they look at it and love it. The second one is they look at it and they suggest modifications to it. And the third one is, hey, they look at it and they say, hey, it's not for us. And guess what? All 3 of those solutions from our perspective are perfectly acceptable. And we understand that not everything is always for everyone, but by getting out in front of this early, looking at it as early as possible, assessing the contracts that you've got in place, and then making a decision about where you want to go from there, it gives the board and the individual building a better opportunity to kind of take a look at this thing long term. So, kind of our process, we look at it and we provide evaluation. If evaluation's a good fit, we bring everything back to a board. When we look at the design and the access rights, we create a project plan, and we figure out a way to put fiber in. So when I talked earlier about time frames, you can see at the bottom, if it's written in there kind of in bold, our average time frame of delivery of a service like this is roughly 180 days beginning to end. So when you show up and you have 100 days before a contract expires, we're probably a little bit late in that ballpark. So, but on the other side, if you show up and you have a year before that contract expires, it gives you as a board and as a board member the opportunity to look at and evaluate a lot of different options that are out there today and changes that you could potentially make to the building. So I'll open it up and take questions if you'd like. Yes, ma'am.
So just, I'm curious when you laid out the schedule of what would happen. So we're in a situation where we're over a year out.
Yep.
The logic, what I'm hearing you say is we should
Evaluate it and we'll take a look at it.
we need to make a commitment for
Nope.
service for you to come out and do a building evaluation?
The evaluation is done completely complimentary and at no cost to the building with no commitment associated with it. Literally all we need is a list of addresses so that we can kind of build in our systems overall costs. And then we'll send actually a group of engineers out to your location to take a look at it. And we'll build a custom plan for your building. Because no 2 buildings are built exactly the same. We want to actually build a plan for the specific building that comes out and then come out and lay it back out to the board at that point.
And as part of that evaluation, whether the infrastructure in the building can accommodate the fiber optic system that would need to be in place?
We're going to build a parallel network. So we're going to build a network completely aside from the network that is in the building today. And we're going to start from bringing it in from the street to the riser, all the way up and into every individual unit. So we would build it completely in parallel, and it wouldn't touch any of the existing infrastructure. The biggest question that we get from folks, and the reason that we send engineers out there, is how are you going to do that, right? And because every building is built differently, that's why I send engineers out, and they come back with written plans for how they would do that. Yes, sir?
I assume that means that you don't clean up afterwards, meaning pulling out the old after the new is in.
No, you don't. You kind of leave it there because we don't also, from an AT&T perspective, we don't own that wiring. We talked about that earlier. That's association property. And then we don't require a resident, if they have copper services still coming in and they have an old-fashioned telephone line that comes in across that copper, we don't require them to convert to fiber So as a result, we don't go back and modify that copper setup because there still could be customers in use on it. So because it's not ours and we don't own it, no, we don't come back and pull it out. If a board made a decision at that point to do the cleanup on their own, you're welcome to do it on the inside wiring that is yours on the inside. We don't see too many do it because it costs way more in labor to pull it out than it does over the long haul to benefit behind it. So. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any type of work that would be complementary to this? So contract cleanup is one thing, makes sense, but if there's other capital improvements or other things being done, would that be, complementary to installing this wire?
Sorry,
So if I was ripping out all the walls and putting in all new wires, this would be a perfect, all new everything, infrastructure, would be a perfect time to do this.
It
Part
would.
of that, is there other complementary projects?
No, it really doesn't, because we do really build a plan for an individual building at an individual building level. There are some buildings that will have conduit that runs from the outside hallways all the way into units. There are other buildings that were built at different times that won't. When we assess it, we assess the principles of the building itself. If you're planning a huge major rewire project within the building, I definitely encourage you to take a look at it at that point, because it certainly makes it easier on everybody, but it's certainly not required. Yes, sir?
Just out of curiosity, is there ever cross-contamination, if you will, from the old wire to the new?
No, the fiber optic cable itself is actually plastic or glass. It doesn't run electricity like the others do, right? There's no electrical signal associated with it. It's built light over glass. So you don't get bleed like you do in some of the other environments. Fiber optic cable reduces a lot of the external noise that's out there, right? Because copper wiring and even coax can act as an antenna for some of those things. And as a result, no, we don't see a lot of cross-contamination. Yes, sir?
What are the prospects for wireless?
Sure.
What are the prospects for really wireless solutions to someday replace even your fiber optic?
So today, when we come in and we bring fiber services into a unit, we drop it into what we call a residential gateway and create a wireless network inside of the building or inside of your individual unit. But it's a private network that is inside of your unit and your unit alone. When you start to talk about could we put up a Wi-Fi network that would in turn handle the entire building, we actually talked about that a little earlier with a couple of folks. The biggest single deterrent to that is overall speed of Wi-Fi. Residents are looking for higher speeds, and the speeds that Wi-Fi can deliver today is not as fast as you can do across a traditional wired network. Plus, you kind of cap yourself a little bit with the Wi-Fi portion of it. With fiber services, we're actually testing in labs higher speeds than 1 gigabit per second. We don't see a methodology today on how that would be delivered via a wireless fashion. So we've seen people ask about it. People put up common locations of Wi-Fi, and it's really good for common spaces. But for inside of individual units, it doesn't look like over the long haul it's going to be the right way to do things. There's still a lot of individual items within buildings that can definitely throw a curve to that. Depends on how your building's built. All right, Jim and I will be around, and if there are further questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Presented here today, and he's going to talk very briefly about electric charging stations. These are questions that I know you're going to get when you're on the elevators and in the halls of your building. So, and after that, we'll wrap up and have everyone have a great evening. Thank you.
And don't feel bad, it was planned to be brief, so chasing me off here. But with that in mind, I really just want to give a quick update on the electric vehicle market, how it pertains to associations today, and what some of the options are, how they work. I don't know about you guys, if it seems like it's a really big issue. I get a lot of questions of it that seem to way outstrip the number of Teslas I see rolling around on the road. but I definitely see that growing. As of August of this year, there were 1.2 million electric vehicles sold in the US. And that's about a 50-50 split between plug-in hybrids and all electric vehicles, which is only 1% of the market. So it seems like not a huge issue. But that being said, the prices have come down over 11% since 2016. Manufacturers are committing a lot of resources to putting more options out there on the road. Ford is spending $4.5 billion over the next 5 years and to bring in 13 models to market. General Motors has 20 all-electric vehicles planned by 2023. And one of the big things, BMW, Volkswagen, and Daimler all together have invested very heavily in charge station companies to build those networks out across the country. So that's something that's growing significantly and very quickly. I get a lot of questions about regulations and the U.S. Political environment being pretty lax. But what you're seeing is all those manufacturers are responding to basically the globalization of the marketplace, and regulations overseas are getting a lot tighter. China and European emission standards, and France, England, India, and China are all currently discussing plans to completely eliminate combustion engines by the year 2040 within those countries. So that's a pretty significant change in what is in the history of things, a relatively short period of time. And that's really what's driving a lot of that change in the marketplace. Now, as far as the implications of that for community associations, you guys are getting a lot of questions, but it's kind of like the internet that we just talked about. It becomes a big selling point and to making the property attractive to new home buyers. And one of the big things that as associations, condos, especially co-ops, that you're looking at is the profile of the electric vehicle buyers. It's a very tech-savvy buyer and a more affluent buyer. There's been a lot of market research on that. Obviously, the vehicles in the past have been very expensive, but even as the costs come down, you still see those limitations on mileage and things, and it's still a notable premium from a similar sized vehicle. So what you're really looking at is having amenities available for a more affluent buyer that you want to attract to your building. Also, complying with emerging laws and building standards. The benchmarking requirements here in the city of Chicago have been a very big deal. Everybody's very concerned about that, wondering where those things are going to go in the future. And all you have to do is look towards the other major cities that are 5 and 10 years ahead in that process. New York obviously is coming out with some standards. They've taken that benchmarking to the next step to say, hey, there's minimum standards that you need to meet, and they're starting to have penalties and fines and things associated with that. As it relates to electric vehicles, California, as you can imagine, is on the cutting edge of that, and they're actually already putting into place minimum requirements for a number of EV charging stations and things in any new construction. So any new condo building, any new apartment building going in, they've got to put a minimum of those spaces dedicated to electric vehicles. So that's what the kind of pressure that you see coming down the road for associations. But most importantly, you've got people asking about it, right? It doesn't matter how many vehicles are out there. It really only matters how many residents are walking into the office and asking about it, how many people are looking at potentially moving into the building, and they're asking those kind of questions. They're asking about gigabit internet, and they're asking about electric vehicle charging stations, and they may never use all that gigabit, right? And they may never buy an electric vehicle, but they want to feel like they're in a community where they have that option available to them, should they so choose so in the future. So the big question then is, as an association, what is your first step in looking into something like that? And with that in mind, really the first step is to put a policy in place, to understand what some of these options are, and have a set policy in place as the association for if someone were to come, what's approved to be put in the building so that they're not trying to put in whatever various options that they want. What's going to be entailed in that, and structurally how it'll work. That's going to put you in a more attractive position when people come in and are asking about, you know, do you have that available already? You may not really even need to have it installed and available. Having the guidelines and the groundwork that show that you're kind of forward-thinking, that it's something that the association is ready to get behind, may be just as important, especially in the short term as far as attracting residents. So with that in mind, what are the options and kind of how do they work? What are some of the cool features that you can get into with this? Because it could be, right, a huge headache potentially to put that in and to manage it. And there's 3 major applications. Obviously the assigned parking, letting a resident have their own individual charging station in place. Community charging, where people might be able to take to stop in a couple of available open spaces and take advantage of that. And actually open charging, which is a fewer associations are going to make sense for, but there are definitely associations out there that have some public parking or paid parking within their building that would want to consider an option like that. And what's really interesting is that the companies like ChargePoint and EV Works, and there's in the flyers that we passed out, there's links to some of that kind of information, some of the different manufacturers out there. But ChargePoint in particular is one that has a really robust offering for associations where you're really not just buying the equipment, you're buying a network and a whole management of that. So with the assigned parking, a resident would be able to pay for their own unit, pay for the installation costs, and they would pay a small fee to ChargePoint on an ongoing basis and have an access card. So they're the only ones who can use that with their access card. The management company, the ChargePoint, as far as managing the equipment, would actually handle all the payment and charging, keeping track of what they're doing, and then they would collect money and pay the association the fees back, reimbursing for the use of electricity. So that's something that is obviously becomes a big concern, is the management of that. It's kind of a package solution, and that's why it definitely makes sense to look at having a standard in place. Say, hey, this is, yes, we'll allow you to do this, but this is what we're going to use. This is kind of the set provider. And the other opportunity is community charging, where they do have, it's not significantly more expensive. It's basically, you can take 2 parking spaces and make them available for people to come in and out. It seems like a potential logistical issue, but what they find is most electric vehicle owners, right, it's not really about spending all night charging your car up every day. They're really looking to top off when it's available. You know, they're going out, coming back, and maybe they've used 25% of the battery. They just want to top that off and keep it there. And they may not go out again for a significant period of time, especially here in the city. So having something like that might be a very attractive amenity to people coming into the building, that they feel that they don't necessarily have to put in this huge significant investment to have a charging option, that they know where they're going to be able to find it. And that works in the same sort of way. There would just be multiple cards that various residents could have. And all of that, who owes what, and collecting that and managing it, is all handled by the company. Some of the cool features that go along with that and being able to promote that to residents are obviously mobile applications that help them find other charging stations, let them know when the charging station is available, things like that. And what I find interesting, and we'll see how this plays out in certain buildings that do have it, but the open charging works in a similar way. If you've got a paid parking area, or if you've got outdoor parking that people could potentially have access to, then you're not only giving your residents access to that, but you can set those stations up to be open to the public, where people can find those on their network and know that that's there. That's something that probably makes more sense for buildings who have public parking in their internal garage where people are coming in, but having those there is going to draw people to that, potentially be a source of income, not just for the parking, but for the building as a whole. Because one of the things that's big about this management system and being the ones in control of it, is that the association can set what those costs are going to be. So if they've got a contracted electricity rate for several years out, they know what that is. They can come in as part of this and say, hey, we're gonna put in that community station, or we're gonna allow you to put in your own station, but here's the rate at which the association needs to be reimbursed. And there could potentially be fees to recoup some of the costs and time that go into managing that solution. So it'll be really interesting to see how some of those things play out as this all develops. But that is basically where the EV market is at right now, and that's all coming along very, very quickly. So we'll definitely be seeing a lot of that more in the future. Does anybody have any questions?
I think your brochures are on the table at the front.
Yep, so those are up there if you want any more details on that.
Thank you very much, Calvin, for those excellent points. I hope they weren't lost in our late hour. These are critical issues for buildings. Internet speed is it is one of the most important things you can focus on. And features that new buyers want, like electric charging stations. It's really a major amenity to a building, and will help keep your building relevant with the rest of the market. So that concludes our program tonight. We hope you found the information helpful. It's a very diverse presentation this evening, and we always enjoy seeing you. We hope you find these beneficial. We'll continue to do these throughout the year. So thank you so much. Our speakers will be in the back of the room for additional questions. And parking validation is at the front desk. It's a major discount, so please do it if you go. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you soon. Good evening.